Hello, I'm Jason Isaacson from American Jewish Committee. This is AJC Perspectives. Welcome. I'm speaking today with Dov Zakheim, former Undersecretary of Defense. Actually, you've got so many titles, I don't even know where to begin, but a longtime friend of our organization and frankly, of TvAbraham and its whole support network. Dov, let me begin our questioning to ask you about a column that I saw that you recently wrote, because you do a fair amount of writing. It was about the Trump doctrine in foreign policy. Although, as you pointed out, at the time of your writing, there really had not yet been a clear declaration of a Trump doctrine by the administration. But how would you define President Trump's second-term approach to foreign affairs? And do you see it differing from the way he approached foreign policy in his first term?
Well, to begin with, I don't think any president or any author of any doctrine actually said, this is my doctrine.
Okay.
No, I don't think Eisenhower did, Truman did, and so on. So I'm not surprised that nobody has actually picked up on that. The question is there a doctrine? And I think there is, and I think it does differ from where he was the first term. A doctrine implies a certain coherence, and I believe that he clearly does not want American boots on the ground pretty much anywhere.
Okay.
You hear him talking about pulling troops out of Europe. You hear him talking about pulling troops out of East Asia, Korea in particular. On the other hand, he is definitely determined to use naval and air forces wherever they might be needed. There's a term called offshore balancing. It actually was borrowed from the Brits, from Castlereagh in the 19th century. Look at what he just did with the Houthis.
Yeah.
Classic offshore balancing. Didn't put people on the ground. He might, maybe, perhaps, put some Marines. I think it'll be Marines if it's anybody, because they come off ships and they can go back on ships. Nobody permanent on the ground. But he bombs them, and he's still bombing them, and he's bombing them intensely. That did not happen in the first term. There wasn't a coherent sense of what he wanted to get out of Afghanistan. Actually, it was Biden who did, but he negotiated it.
Right.
He didn't want to be involved in forever wars, but he never really, I think, had a coordinated, coherent sense of what he wanted.
In fact, wanted to diminish the troop strength in Syria.
That's right.
Did attack General Soleimani of Iran, but not boots on the ground.
That's exactly right. But it wasn't as coherent.
Yeah.
He did. I mean, look, he bombed Syria.
Yeah.
He saw those children being gassed, and boom, he reacted.
Right.
But you didn't get a sense of coherence. I mean, clearly, he's learned from that first term in many, many ways. A lot of people have problems with what he's learned, but that's a whole other issue. But in this regard, I think this is where he's headed.
Okay, but aside from the military aspects of a so-called Trump doctrine, you also have a President Trump who speaks about acquiring other territories. Is that also part of a larger doctrine of some sort, or?
Well, his hero might be President James K. Polk, who was ready to take over Canada if he didn't get his way, 54-40 or fight. He's not the first president who tried to acquire Greenland, by the way.
Yeah.
I think his concept is America should be North America. And anything north of the United States should be his. Whether that'll happen or not, I think what he's done is unite the Canadians to the point where Mark Carney might well be reelected as prime minister.
Which wasn't going to happen a few months ago.
Wasn't going to happen under his predecessor,
Right.
That's for sure. The Greenlanders are very unhappy. But beyond just sort of taking over, he definitely wants to see a much stronger defensive posture, primarily against China. And that has to do with something he doesn't talk about, which is global warming. But it's global warming that's created the worry, because if the Chinese can start moving through the Northwest Passage, which was always a dream but didn't really exist, but now might, that creates a security challenge for the United States. So obviously, he'd like to take Canada, he'd like to take Greenland. But remember, Mr. Trump takes the most extreme position on something and then waits and sees what he gets out of it. It's not a bad negotiating posture. It just drives some people a little wild.
I guess we'll see. Let's focus on U.S. policy in the Middle East.
Yeah.
The contrast, also the similarities between President Trump and his predecessor, President Biden. Both presidents can be described, I think, quite fairly as pro-Israel, want a strong Israel and want to push back against Israel's adversaries. Both work to advance Israel's regional integration, notably, of course, under President Trump in his first term, the Abraham Accords. How would you describe what is different and what is the same between both Trump 1 and Trump 2 and Trump 2 and President Biden?
Well, I think you've laid it out pretty well in terms of the similarities.
Okay.
I think the differences are that Biden, to some extent, as with, frankly, Russia, deterred himself. He would not, for instance, go as far as he could have in terms of cutting off the ability of Iran to sell oil to, say, India or to Iraq. Trump's less likely to do that. Biden never really gave up on the idea of a real deal with Iran. Trump wavers. And he also, I think, is different in the way he's handled the Houthis. Biden, the attacks were intermittent.
Yeah.
Not with Trump. He's going full bore on this. And finally, on Israel, if Trump had not recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, I am willing to bet the family farm that Biden would not have done it.
No, I think that's quite clear.
And so you have a sense that Trump is prepared to go just that extra step or two that Biden simply wouldn't go to. And finally, there's one other big change. Not so much from Trump 1, but from Biden, is the relationship with Netanyahu. Now, whether that relationship is healthy for American Jews is a whole other issue. But there's no question that look at that little film he put out, where at the end of the film, he and Netanyahu are sitting on the beach together in their bathing suits. It's kind of surreal.
Yeah.
But it does tell you a degree of willingness to work with the guy, whereas Biden's quoted as saying he was a son of a bitch.
Even though he had a historic relationship with Bibi, I mean, going back like 50 years.
But he didn't like him those 50 years.
But of course, Biden had other associations with Israel, very deep associations with Israel.
He
You
did.
can't take that away from him, absolutely.
No, he had those associations. The issue, of course, was they were not the associations that were running Israel.
Right.
Whereas Trump has no time at all for Bibi's opposition.
How would you characterize both Biden's and Trump's attitude toward the Palestinians?
Well, Biden clearly cared about them.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of merit to caring about them.
Yeah.
They're people. They deserve an address of their own. But that's a personal view.
And a better government.
Oh, and a far better government.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question. Yeah. That's in many ways, that's their biggest problem. If they had a viable, less corrupt leadership, it would be much more difficult to argue against the two-state solution.
Yeah.
Trump doesn't seem to care about them terribly much. I mean, he's ready to move 2 million of them into wherever they can be moved.
Yeah.
That's not an attack on Trump. That's his position.
Yeah.
Now, again, he's taken an extreme position, and let's see what gets walked back. But I'm willing to bet, just as with Colombia and Panama, he gets a significant amount of what he wanted. Clearly, the status quo is not the status quo ante before he threw out his extreme position.
Right.
That is not bad negotiation. I don't know how good he was in his real estate deals.
Right.
But this is not bad negotiating. The trouble is it shakes people up so much that it creates a degree of hostility and resentment, and that doesn't go away.
Interesting point. Dov, you've had extensive experience with political and military figures and business leaders across the Middle East, and of course elsewhere in the world, over your decades in government and your consulting careers, and as a leading figure in important U.S. foreign policy think tanks. America has been heavily focused on the Middle East for decades, for a range of strategic, economic, and cultural reasons. There was a period under President Obama when there was talk of a pivot by the United States toward Asia, which was interpreted in the Middle East as being a pivot away from the Middle East. Is America's interest in the Middle East, not just the security of Israel, but the security of Arab partners as well, enduring in American policy? Or could it be changed, shoved aside, replaced by something else?
That's the question is beside the point. The Middle East is always there. Yeah. Jim Baker wanted to walk away from the Middle East. Lots of secretaries of state have wanted to walk away from the Middle East. It's always there. The Middle East is a briar patch. And no matter how much you try to get out of the briar patch, you're stuck. And this is what Mr. Trump is discovering with the Houthis. He'd love to walk away from the Middle East if he could, but the Houthis won't let him. The Iranians won't let him. The Palestinians won't let him. The Israelis won't let him. Yeah. The Syrians won't let him. So, we just sent a second carrier out there. What does that tell you? So in a sense, Bob Gates once said, the enemy gets a vote. And the Middle East gets at least one vote.
Is there enough capacity by the United States, militarily and financially, to be in the Middle East as present as we have been over the years, and also to confront dangers in the Far East?
No. Financially, if we wanted to spend the money. But look, we have a year-long concurrent resolution, and all the Defense Department's getting is another $8 billion. That's not going to go very far. If we wanted to spend more money, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Wicker, says 5% of gross domestic product. That's a lot more money. That's $1.3 trillion. We're at 880. Yeah. So financially, we've made a choice, at least for the time being. Militarily, no way. We simply do not, that's one of the reasons why allies are so important. Mm-hmm. We do not have enough to be in everywhere, be in East Asia, if we really want to be there, which we do, mm-hmm. to be in the Middle East, where we're stuck. And as for Europe, yes, one could argue that the Europeans need to do more, and they should do more. Mm-hmm. And, the word free riders, which everybody now associates with Mr. Trump, was actually articulated by Mr. Obama. It's a bipartisan view, yeah. And it goes back to the 70s, if not earlier. But we're not going to walk away entirely. And so how do we do it all? The answer is we can't.
I remember, though, under the Biden administration, maybe it goes back earlier than that, there's a great deal of talk about how we are relying on our partners in the region to pick up more of the load right. of defending themselves. Right. A huge emphasis in the Biden administration on the sort of the Gulf states, especially taking more responsibility. Is that the answer, that we can still be as present, but we're more of a coordinator rather than actual military forces?
I think that's the Trump vision. That's the offshore balancing vision.
Okay.
But it involves, for instance, much more serious and greater expenditure on defense than right now the Gulf states are prepared to make. Mm-hmm. Secondly, other than Saudi Arabia, these are small states. There's only so much they can do.
Yeah.
And so there's that. The Saudis and the Israelis work together, but there's a limit, and that limit will still be there until there's formal relations. And those formal relations aren't going to happen unless the Saudis decide they don't care about the Palestinians at all. That is not their position. So when you talk about, and by the way, one other thing, the Gulf states themselves are not fully integrated militarily. So when you talk about them sort of fending for themselves, mm-hmm. Israel can fend for itself up to a point, still needs our support. The rest of them, they need a lot more than Israel does.
Yeah. Okay, so let me stay on that theme. Draw your attention to the signing of the Abraham Accords, the establishment of formal relations between Israel and two Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Bahrain. Within 3 months, there was a third announcement with Morocco. Sudan was in there, but Sudan is dysfunctional and that wasn't able to move forward, but I hope it will eventually. Since that time, Israel has signed memoranda of understanding on defense issues with Morocco and with Bahrain. As a former senior Pentagon official, how would you describe the military-to-military relationships between Israel and the Arab world generally, not just those two countries, and how far along are we in the creation of the kind of regional security architecture that people have been talking about for years?
Well, they're two different things, actually.
Okay.
Mill-mill relations tend to work well because they avoid the politics. We have good mill-mill relations with a number of other countries because they're below the radar. And so you can say the Saudis and the Israelis have been working together for ages, at least started with intelligence. It's gone beyond that. But that's a very separate thing from an integrated military approach. And I would argue even NATO isn't entirely integrated, and that's been an alliance since 1949. Okay? It takes time, and it takes a degree of trust that is not entirely there. Do the Bahrainis and the Qataris really trust each other? Do the Saudis and the Qataris really trust each other? Do any of them fully trust the Kuwaitis? Do the Omanis really trust the others? Do they all trust the Israelis 100%? If you're going to truly integrate your military, you need to fully trust the other guy. Who do we fully trust? The Brits, the Australians, and that's why we have AUKUS. Give me a longer list of those we fully trust. We have the Five Eyes.
Right.
Are the French part of the Five Eyes? Are the Germans part of the Five Eyes? You see my point. There are limits.
Israel and Egypt have important military-to-military relationships and intelligence relationships, and Israel and Jordan as well. Are those models for how this could eventually develop? Although it's in the context of kind of a cold peace.
Well, again, I think the point is the cold peace between Israel and Egypt, and to a great extent between Israel and Jordan, is a political cold peace.
Yeah.
Militarily, they're working very well together.
Yeah.
We know that the Israelis helped the Egyptians out in the Sinai a lot more than either side is willing to admit.
Mm-hmm.
And those are military operations. And so as long as it's kept below the political radar, a lot can be accomplished. What you were just asking me a minute ago, though, was can you integrate 7 or more countries?
Yeah.
That's asking a lot.
Although we saw in April of last year and October of last year, when Iran fired missiles and drones at Israel, it wasn't only the United States that helped Israel.
Right.
It was also states in the region, and also France and UK.
That's absolutely right. But that was a single operation.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, I thought, was true integration.
Yeah, ongoing. Yeah.
That's much more demanding. Look, one should not minimize what happened against those Iranian missiles. That is truly significant. I mean, the Brits and the French, that was great.
Yeah.
The fact that you had Gulf states working alongside Israel. I mean, the last time you saw that was in that movie Independence Day, where all the aircraft are flying, you've got the Israelis and the Arabs and the Russians and this and that and the other. But that was a movie. This was real.
And what a powerful symbol
Absolutely.
of not only regional integration that was emerging, but also, frankly, the enormous capability of Israel in defeating the same enemy that also threatens states in the Gulf.
And the ability of the Gulf states to participate.
Yes.
I mean, to me, that's a real harbinger of the future. Again, one has to resolve Gaza first.
Yeah. Let me go back to another question that relates to your experience in the Defense Department. We were speaking before about the degree to which the United States can afford to have deployments in the East, in Asia, in addition to the Middle East. But the Trump administration Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has signaled a significant desire to impose a cut every year in line with the government efficiency efforts of the administration. I've seen figures of 8% a year, but it's not clear to me whether that's an overall cut in the budget of the Defense Department or a reordering of priorities of the Defense Department. Can you explain some of this? It's very confusing.
He started off with 8% off of the Biden budget.
Right.
I actually ran the numbers, and it turned out it wasn't.
I have to say, you were the controller of the Pentagon,
yes,
so you know something about the budget of the Pentagon.
And so it turned out that he was actually closer to probably 5 or 6%.
Okay.
Because 8% would have been $72 billion, and he was talking about $50 billion. a lot of people thought he was simply going to cut it.
Right.
He then announced that, no, he's going to move it. Now, the question is, first of all, where's he moving the money from? Because for those programs, it's a cut.
Yeah.
Secondly, where is he moving them to? So he's got, for instance, this Golden Dome idea.
Okay.
That's an updated variant, President Trump's idea, an updated variant of Star Wars. Star Wars, we've spent tens of billions on, still hasn't happened.
Right.
It's going to cost a ton of money. So if the money goes to that, then a lot of other conventional programs go by the wayside. It's going to be much harder to build a bigger Navy. He's trying to exempt the Navy.
I wanted to ask you about the Navy.
He's said he's exempting a number of programs. He's exempting, like, I think 17 programs, including submarines, which are critical against the Chinese, by the way.
Okay.
Including drones, which are supposed to fly alongside the next generation, called the F-47 aircraft. By the way, people think, oh, Mr. Trump, 47. Turns out we've had F-47s before.
Oh.
Yeah, they were P-47s, they became F-47. But okay, if Mr. Trump wants it to be F-47, I'm fine with that, you know. I mean, you know, we've had F-2s, we've had, you know, so that's what, John Adams, I suppose. Whatever. The point is, the replicator program, which is the drone program, he's exempted that. He's exempted a number of key programs. And he has focused on the Navy. But again, that goes back to the very first answer I gave you in terms of the doctrine. If you're going to be an offshore balancer, you better have a strong Navy and Air Force. So this is consistent with that.
How has the decision, which I think was taken toward the end of the Trump administration but implemented under Biden, if I recall correctly, the decision to put Israel into the area of responsibility of CENTCOM, so that the Israeli military interacts with the Arab militaries in Bahrain, in the naval base there in Nafsat. How has that changed the region?
Well,
and Israel's ability to interact with its neighbors?
It certainly fosters military cooperation. Yeah. It's a perfect vehicle for the under the radar that I was talking about, military to military. And of course, there, under the aegis of CENTCOM, the Israelis and the Saudis can really work it out. And not only the Saudis, all these there's a lot of CENTCOM countries. And Israel works with all of them. To my knowledge, they've not been excluded. You go down to Norfolk, you go down to, Tampa, to CENTCOM headquarters. Right. You see the Israeli flag with all those other flags. So that's a very big deal, and I think that helped underpin what became the Abraham Accords.
Very interesting. Different question. Soft power. As you know, the Trump administration is intent on significantly scaling back or eliminating what we have traditionally called soft power instruments of U.S. foreign policy, foreign aid, involvement in international organizations, humanitarian relief to countries over the last 60 or so years, as well as the government-funded but rigorously professional news and cultural broadcasts of Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, Fulbright scholarships for study abroad, all of these elements of American power, soft power. How does that change the ability of America to, first of all, reputationally, but also our ability to bring along the next generation of leaders around the world to be friends of and supporters of and allies of the United States?
Well,
or am I overstating the case?
No, you're not, because I'm a trustee of the American University of Iraq in Sulaymaniyah, which imparts American values to all these Iraqi kids and Kurdish kids and so on. And so, it's like anything else. This isn't Mr. Trump. This is Mr. Musk, and he's approaching things with a meat axe. And all I can say is, this isn't Twitter. Yeah. You can't eliminate 80% of all these organizations and expect them to do what they've been created to do. Now, is there waste in AID? Of course there's waste in AID. Yeah. I was on a commission that dealt with waste, fraud, and abuse in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I had the AID portfolio, so I can tell you, yes, there's waste. Yeah. But to eliminate AID, now look, it was part of the State Department. if, as part of the State Department, it still continues to function in a effective way, I can live with that. Why get rid of Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America? It puzzles the heck out of me.
Yeah.
And obviously, getting rid of money that supports the American universities, just, like I said, full disclosure, I'm a trustee of one of them. But again, I'm puzzled.
How does it help America to provide humanitarian relief in Africa?
Well, the president I served, Mr. George W. Bush, is proudest of PEPFAR. When he goes out and gives a speech, that's what he talks about.
Yeah.
We've saved millions of lives.
That matters.
Yes, it matters. Does it win us friends in the United Nations votes? Not necessarily. But you know what? Saving somebody's life is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, the right thing. And the next generation of leaders of these countries may believe that they have a friend in the United States.
Maybe. You never know. I mean, let's face it. Mr. Orban was on a George Soros scholarship at Oxford. He's not exactly a fan of George Soros. So you never know. But let me put it this way: if like they say about lotteries, you can't win if you don't play.
Yeah, and the Chinese are playing.
And the Chinese are playing big time.
So if the United States pulls out of UNESCO, for instance, that leaves
Wherever
the field
we
open.
pull out,
Yeah.
There's never a vacuum. The Chinese move right in.
Yeah.
The Russians too. They're all over Africa.
Different question entirely, Devin. I think I'll end with this. I'm going to ask you a question that I asked AJC CEO Congressman Ted Deutsch in a recent program about the impact of American Jews in political life and in the shaping of U.S. government policies in various sectors. So we account for just 2% of the U.S. population, yet play an outsized role, I think you could say, in political life in both parties. This wasn't the case a century ago or even 60 or 70 years ago, but it is certainly today. In addition to your storied career in government service and in the private sector, you're also an ordained rabbi. From your vantage point, what is it about public policy and public service that so engages American Jews?
Well, we have a tradition of that. I wrote a book about Nehemiah. Who was Nehemiah? He was a senior court official in the Persian Empire. The book of Nehemiah is in the Bible. You can look it up. Tremendously influential. We just had the holiday of Purim. Mordecai becomes the great vizier. So you might say, well, these are biblical and you may or may not believe. Fine. But we've had, during the years, golden age of Spain, of Jewry in Spain, we had Samuel ibn Agrela, who not only was the Grand Vizier of one of the Moorish states, but also wrote a commentary on the Mishnah. He was a rabbi and a vizier, and, by the way, a general. So we have a tradition, and it's always been, do the Jews get the opportunity? If the Jews get the opportunity, they believe they should serve the country. We pray for the welfare of the country we're in.
Yeah.
That's from the book of Jeremiah, quite frankly. We believe in public service. If people are good to us, we believe we need to be good to them.
Yeah.
It's not just take. It's give even more than you've received. And so we've had leaders over the centuries when they were able to be. When they were not able to be, what could you do? There's another rabbi, far less well known, who was a close associate of General Potemkin, who was Catherine the Great's great general. And he was also a rabbi, and apparently, there's testimony to this effect, when the two of them rode together, whenever Potemkin had to stop for something, this rabbi would write rabbinic answers to legal questions of Jewish law.
Wow.
So this is what we've inherited.
Not an American Jewish phenomenon, it's a Jewish phenomenon.
It is a Jewish phenomenon.
Yeah.
The difference, of course, is America in the last 70 or so years, maybe less than that, half century, say,
Yeah.
has given Jews the opportunity to serve. And, you know, in some respects, even that's not new. Go up to Newport, go to the synagogue there.
Yeah.
There's a flagpole. And around the flagpole, there's a leading Jew in each state, each colony, who supported the American
And a letter
Revolution.
from George Washington.
Well, but this is before the letter.
Wow.
These are the 13 colonies, a leading Jew in each colony who supported the revolution. You give us the chance, we'll pay back in spades.
I can't think of a better way to end this conversation. Dov Zakheim, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us at AJC Perspectives.